Welcome to the weekend. I'm Jonathan Capehart along with Eugene Daniels and Jackie Alamany. For those waking up in Minnesota this morning, this is the front page of the Star Tribune. In less than 3 weeks, the city of Minneapolis has now faced the loss of 2 of its citizens at the hands of federal law enforcement. On January 7th, Renee Good was shot and killed while in her SUV, and yesterday, ICU nurse Alex Preddy was shot and killed while at least 5 agents surrounded him on the ground. Both were 37 years old. Both now share the same tragic story. In each case, the Trump administration wasted no time in asserting what they claimed were the facts in the case, just hours after the incidents, before any investigation could be conducted, labeling Good and Preddy not as victims, but as assailants. For Preddy, the Department of Homeland Security claimed he approached U.S. Border Patrol officers with a 9mm semi-automatic handgun, violently resisted attempts to be disarmed, and wanted to do maximum damage and massacre law enforcement. As was the case with Renee Good, there have been multiple videos released that contradict the narrative the Trump administration would like the public to believe, a narrative that demands you believe that Preddy used his gun to assault officers. There is video showing the moments leading up to the shooting. We must warn you that what you are about to see is hard to watch. MS Now is working to report out more details, but what we do know from the Minneapolis police chief is that Preddy was a lawful gun owner with a permit to carry. In fact, Minnesota is an open carry state. At no point in the video does it appear that Preddy is ever holding his gun, but instead appears to be holding a cell phone or camera likely to record the interaction with federal agents as he tried to help a woman up who was shoved by one of them. In a sworn court declaration, a person who says she watched Preddy get killed in front of her proclaimed, quote, "It didn't look like he was trying to resist, just trying to help the woman up. I didn't see him with a gun. They threw him to the ground. 4 or 5 agents had him on the ground and they just started shooting him. They shot him so many times." Preddy's family put out a statement last night, his father saying in part, "Alex wanted to make a difference in this world. Unfortunately, he will not be with us to see his impact. I do not throw around the hero term lightly. However, his last thought and act was to protect a woman. The sickening lies told about our son by the administration are reprehensible and disgusting. Please get the truth out about our son." When it comes to that request, MS Now has confirmed that the Department of Homeland Security plans to lead the investigation of its agents who shot and killed Preddy. Not the FBI, but DHS, the same agency that has already claimed its agents did everything by the book. Joining us now from Minneapolis is MS Now reporter David Noriega. David, thank you for joining us so early this morning. What are you anticipating today, the day after the killing of Mr. Preddy?
Good morning, guys. So the big question is, to what extent will we see big protest mobilizations in the immediate fallout of this incident. One crucial factor to consider there is the fact that Minnesota Governor Tim Walz has deployed the National Guard to sort of preemptively prevent things from getting out of hand. It is possible that that will have a measurable effect on how many people come out and on how confrontational those protests get with respect to their interactions with federal law enforcement. In the past, here in Minnesota, as well as in other cities where we've seen these kinds of indiscriminate immigration, violent, often immigration raids and protests against them, often, we see scuffles, violent interactions, violent reactions from federal law enforcement to often peacefully assembled protesters. Whether or not we see that today, I think, depends on the extent of the deployment of the National Guard and kind of how they tactically approach this situation. The next thing that we're going to be paying close attention to is the aftermath of the case, the legal case and its handling. Local and state authorities have already filed suit against the federal government, asserting that the federal government has mishandled the evidence in this case in a way that Attorney General Keith Ellison described in a court filing as astonishing. They said that they prevented local authorities who have jurisdiction to criminally investigate this case, physically prevented them from arriving at the scene, setting up a perimeter, gathering evidence. They have accused them of improperly removing evidence from the scene, confiscating cell phones, improperly detaining people who were witnesses. A federal judge has already issued an order instructing the federal government to not destroy or otherwise tamper with any additional evidence in this case. This is, of course, related to what you guys pointed out, which is the fact that the highly unusual fact that DHS is going to be investigating this case internally rather than having an outside criminal investigative agency investigate what happened, whether at the federal or the state or local level. I've been talking to former DHS officials, career people, not political people who have worked in Republican and Democratic administrations, and they say that specific fact, the mishandling of evidence and the blocking of other criminal authorities from investigating these cases is highly unusual. It's one of many things about this situation that is highly unusual, guys.
MS Now's David Noriega in Minneapolis. Thank you very much for that report. Let's bring in Michelle Norris, MS Now senior contributing editor, and Tom Manger, MS Now law enforcement analyst and former U.S. Capitol Police chief. Thank you both very much for coming back to the weekend. Michelle, you put out a video on your Instagram feed last night that I would love for you to quickly summarize today. And that basically was, we know how Alex Preddy died, but you thought it was important to let people know how Alex Preddy lived. Tell us what you learned from the people you talked to who knew and loved Alex Preddy.
First of all, thank you for having me again. It's rather incredible that we're here talking about yet another shooting on the south side of Minneapolis. We now know that he was a nurse, an ICU nurse at the VA. And I had a chance to talk to some of the people who worked with him and learned a little bit about him. And what I learned stands in stark contrast to the way that he was described in a very hasty manner by the Department of Homeland Security, who immediately said that he was acting as a domestic terrorist. They described someone who was funny, who was a very hard worker, who always raised his hand to work extra hours or to help other people. One of the doctors described him as someone who really focused on people who were in training. A lot of people in their trainings have to circulate through the ICU. People don't like necessarily working in the ICU if you're not used to it. The hours are intense, the hours are long, and there's just, a lot of chaos in that environment, and not everyone could handle it. And he was someone who they said had almost a sense of radar. And he would, even if it wasn't evident that someone was uncomfortable, he could sense that. And he would gravitate toward them and really help them find their sea legs in an environment like that. And the doctors he worked with said that he also had a good bedside manner. Some of the patients at the VA were, they cantankerous, in pain, sometimes would say things that were a little bit impolitic or unsavory, particularly to women doctors or fellow nurses. And he had a way of standing up for his coworkers, but at the same time not being disrespectful to the people that he was working with. And I think it is important to remember how he lived. Not just as a nurse, he was a son. He was a resident of Minneapolis. He loved to bike. He loved the outdoors. And as I learned a little bit about him, I wanted to share that because he will forever be remembered by the way he died. We've all seen it. We've all seen it from several angles. And I think it is important to take a moment and remember how he lived also.
Police Chief Major, thanks for joining us this morning. I want to ask you about the villainizing and the narrative that this government is trying to push forward about Preddy's actions. They're obviously very focused on the fact that he had a gun. But when you look at the video from whichever angle you have been able to watch, whether it was on our show or on the internet, it is very clear that he did not pull a gun out. And the reporting indicates that agents didn't even know he had one until he was already pinned to the sidewalk, and that an agent had already removed his gun from him before another agent started opening fire on him while he was on the ground. And at least 10 shots were fired against him. Does it matter in any way? Is it at all relevant that he was carrying a gun?
So it's relevant to the extent that if he used the gun in a way to threaten someone's life. I mean, any use of deadly force by police has to be in a situation where an officer's life is in danger or they're protecting someone else's life. At no point, and Jonathan said this earlier, at no point does it appear that this individual had a gun in his hand. In fact, he was pinned down to the ground. And so how was he a danger to anyone at that point? And so there are so many concerning things about this case from the initial narrative, that the first statement that came out from DHS that an individual approached ICE agents brandishing a gun. And we now know that that is absolutely not true. And the fact that DHS has basically stopped any other organization from looking at the evidence, from participating in this investigation. Again, very unusual and very concerning.
Michelle, when things like this happen, we often hear and see lawmakers and folks say, you know, this is not who we are. This is not America. But at the very least,
the Constitution of the United States lays out a clear and powerful mechanism for dealing with a president who is believed to have crossed constitutional lines. And that mechanism is found in Article 2, Section 4, which states that the president, vice president, and all civil officers shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. And this language is now being cited by members of Congress and political advocates who argue that Donald Trump's conduct fits within that definition, not as political theater, but as a constitutional argument, built on the idea that the president has a duty to faithfully execute the laws and preserve the separation of powers, and that when a president is accused of obstructing investigations, defying congressional authority, misusing federal power, attacking free expression, or encouraging hostility toward other branches of government, the remedy provided by the Constitution is impeachment by the House and trial by the Senate, where a 2/3 vote is required for removal. And while no such removal vote has occurred, the presence of formal impeachment resolutions shows how this debate is being framed in constitutional terms rather than partisan slogans. Because the House holds the sole power to impeach, and the Senate holds the sole power to try and convict, which means any serious effort to remove a president must pass through this exact process. And history shows how difficult that path is, since Trump was impeached twice before and acquitted both times, demonstrating that removal requires not only allegations, but overwhelming political consensus. And that is where the real challenge lies. Because even if impeachment articles are introduced, debated, and passed by a simple majority in the House, the Senate threshold of 67 votes demands bipartisan agreement that the president's actions meet the standard of high crimes and misdemeanors. And that is why discussions about Article 2 are often tied to future political outcomes. such as control of the House after elections, public opinion shifts, and the willingness of senators to break with their party and place constitutional duty above political loyalty. And alongside impeachment, some lawmakers reference the 25th Amendment, which allows the vice president and cabinet to declare a president unable to discharge the duties of office, although this route is even less likely without clear incapacity. Yet its mention underscores how serious the constitutional conversation has become, because both impeachment and the 25th Amendment exist for moments when lawmakers believe presidential power has been misused in ways that threaten democratic balance. And whether or not such efforts advance the debate itself reflects a broader struggle over the limits of executive authority, the role of Congress as a check on power, and the enduring relevance of the Constitution as the framework that governs how disputes over presidential conduct are resolved, not by rhetoric, but by a defined legal process that requires evidence, votes, and extraordinary consensus before a president can be removed from office.